So, with summer on the horizon, we all look forward to fresher foods, fruits, vegetables, salads, grilling, and being outside. But here's something most people don't realize. The CDC reports that produce accounts for nearly half of all foodborne illnesses, with leafy greens being one of the biggest contributors. And when it comes to deaths, meat and poultry are among the leading causes, largely due to bacteria like salmonella and listeria. Hi everyone, welcome back. It's been a little while, but today we are breaking down 5 of the riskiest foods that we eat, along with some simple evidence-based ways to reduce the risk and so we can eat with more confidence. Now, before we get into the video, I do want to thank the few people who have consistently been interacting with my videos and with the shorts. I don't push the channel too much because I know that I don't have the time to create content as professionally or as well as I'd like to. But whether it's 5 or 500 views, I'm grateful someone's seeing my work. And I'm grateful that you guys like it and that, even you're learning something from it. So thank you so much for being here. Thanks for sharing with me. I look forward to chatting with you guys so that I'm not talking to myself only. So also, yesterday was Naked Gardening Day. So I hope that you guys were gardening responsibly and safely and that you started gardening something. So now let's get started. I compared the data from both Canada and the USA for 2025, wanting to see what the riskiest foods were. And I noted that the patterns were the same across the board. Leafy greens had the highest volume of illness, while poultry had the highest death risk. And this is usually because of salmonella and campylobacter, which is one of the most common causes of food poisoning globally. Now, this bacteria, campylobacter, it lives in the intestines of animals, especially in poultry. Dairy and deli meats showed a severe listeria risk, while there were raw and undercooked foods that were showing consistent risk across the board. So today we're going to get into some of these foods and safer practices. So let's get into it. So let's examine these leafy greens. Leafy greens like spinach and romaine are one of the top sources of foodborne illnesses, and we eat them raw. In fact, they are responsible for more illnesses than any other single food category. Why? We eat them raw. And contamination can happen in the field or during processing, in the grocery store, just so many places, so many hands that touch them. To be safe, you want to wash your vegetables thoroughly. You want to choose whole heads when possible, and you want to store and use them quickly. So leafy greens also are one of the easiest vegetables, one of the easiest things that you can grow by yourself. So if you want to be super, super safe, then you can start with lettuce or just simple leafy greens that you can grow in your backyard on your windowsill, and that will cut out some of the middlemen. So next we have poultry, and chicken and turkey are among the leading sources of fatal foodborne illnesses. They commonly carry bacteria like salmonella and campylobacter that I mentioned earlier. And so if you want to be safe, you want to cook to the proper temperature, which is 74 degrees Celsius or 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And you can use a meat thermometer to check this. You also want to avoid cross-contamination, which is you don't want to put the meat together with your vegetables, and you want to make sure that you're cleaning up really well with hot soapy water. For higher risk foods like poultry and sushi or anything like that, don't eat anything raw if you're not sure. Now, it's advised that you don't wash raw poultry, but I'm from the Caribbean, and so I swear by a 15-minute baking soda soak for my produce and for a rinse for my meat, which can help lift the dirt and residue and even some contaminants, but it really doesn't fully eliminate parasites. So it's best to use a more thorough cleaning process if you have one, like add in acids and stuff like that. So washing and rinsing for me is key, and I consider the source all the time and their practices, because if the person who's handling the meat is not cleaning it well, then of course you want to make sure that you're cleaning and taking out any refuse that you don't want to eat. So for deli meats, they are known as a source of just extreme listeria outbreaks, and especially because they're ready to eat. We pluck them from the fridge and we just stick them into our sandwiches or into our mouths. So to be safer, we want to consume really quickly. 3 to 5 days is the maximum. And store them properly. Make sure that you have them closed in the fridge. Heat them up if needed. That's probably a better practice. And check before you use them. Even if they're really stored, they can tend to become really risky over time. So you want to check for slime, mold, and just all the usual suspects. Again, the guidelines recommend that you eat them within 3 to 5 days. And, if they're coming up to the end, you can usually dehydrate them, or you can freeze them if if they get to like 4 days and you're not finishing them off, then they freeze well. Now, deli meats are considered higher risk because they're linked to listeria. Listeria can cause listeriosis, which is rare but serious, and it can lead to hospitalization and even death in vulnerable people. So it's unlike bacteria where it can grow in the fridge, right? So be careful with those deli meats. They're very different from many other foods because they can still go really bad in the fridge. Let's talk about ground beef. I made a video about a conspiracy behind ground beef that turned out to be true with the whole pink slime debacle, and I'm going to link that here with a card. Now, ground beef is at a higher risk because bacteria can be mixed throughout the meat. In fact, beef is one of the top sources of E. coli infections. It lives in the intestines of the cattle, and it can contaminate the meat during processing. Even a small amount of E. coli can cause illness. But here's what most people don't realize. A single package of ground beef can contain meat from dozens or even hundreds of different cows. And this happens because meat from multiple animals is combined during the processing, and trimmings from different sources are blended together. This matters because if one animal is contaminated, then it can affect the entire batch. And this increases the chance of contamination spreading widely. So beef is often involved in these large-scale outbreaks, right? Ground beef is always on a recall, and it always has a higher risk of contamination because you have the mixed sources, then you've got the distributed bacteria, and then oftentimes we have undercooked burgers or just not well prepared. Now, when we combine all three together, of course, we are increasing the risk. So to be safe, you want to cook your burgers fully to an internal temperature of about 71 degrees Celsius or higher, and that's 160 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to avoid your undercooked burgers. Avoid cross-contamination, and you want to separate the raw meat from other foods when you're cooking it. Clean your surfaces and your hands thoroughly with, again, a little bleach water, a little soapy hot water, and try to source your meat, if you can, from local butchery or from local farmers. Ground beef is really higher risk because it mixes meat from multiple animals. And, any bacteria on the surface can just get spread throughout. So it has to be fully cooked to be safe. And you might even want to add in some healing spices like turmeric and, rosemary and cinnamon, those things to make sure that you're protecting your stomach, hot peppers and ginger and those things as well. Now, this next food surprised me when I first learned how dangerous it was a few years ago, because as a Caribbean person, I notoriously eat overnight rice. And rice might seem like one of the safest foods we can eat, but it actually carries a hidden risk. Uncooked rice can contain Bacillus cereus. I'm not sure this is how we pronounce any of these scientific names, but we're right in. Now, these bacteria, they form spores that can survive cooking. So the issue isn't the cooking per se, it's what happens after. If the rice is left sitting at room temperature, these spores can grow and they can produce toxins that are not going to be destroyed when you reheat the rice. Or even if you turn it into fried rice, it doesn't matter, it still won't destroy the bacteria. So to make rice safer, you want to cool the rice quickly after you cook it, right? You want to store it in the fridge within 1 to 2 hours. You want to reheat thoroughly, but only make sure that you're reheating once. I still struggle with this one to this day. And sometimes I find myself reheating days old rice. So this is something I must do better with. You want to avoid leaving rice out for long periods is the general idea. Rice becomes risky, not when you cook it, but when it's left sitting too long afterwards. So even if you think about it, even the simplest foods that we just eat mindlessly have layers to them. And understanding those layers is how you can start to feel more confident, or even how you can consume a little bit more safely. So to wrap up today's video, I will say this. These foods aren't bad per se, but you must practice caution to consume them safely, or any foods for that matter. I even soak my organic and prepackaged produce to ensure that they're clean. And like I mentioned, I wash my meat. Pause. So here's what I want you to take away from this. You have more control than you think, right? And it's this thought that led me to start growing food at home, wanting to control what was going into my body and into my mouth. It's not so much out of fear, but more out of curiosity and wanting a bit more control, right? Wanting to feel more connected to what I was eating. It started small. Like I said, I mentioned this before. I started on a balcony in Brampton, right? I started with a few herbs and some small greens on the windowsill as well. And now I'm trying things in different spaces. And what I realize is you don't need a farm. You don't need perfect conditions. You just need to start experimenting with your environment. And you have to be fed up enough with how they're playing in your face to be able to say, you know what, that's enough. Because growing even a little bit of your own food changes how you think about food entirely and how you think about control entirely. Eating with confidence doesn't come from avoiding everything, right? As I mentioned earlier on, this isn't about fear. This is about awareness. It comes from understanding that what you're eating can be handled well, and you can take small steps to ensure that that's done. And sometimes you grow something yourself and now you have something that what you're eating, even if it's just one plant. Some of the foods we trust the most, like, fresh pre-cut fruit, let's say, carry some extreme risk and we don't even think about it, right? They're just simply not handled well. So what's a food that you've always had a feeling about, but you never really confirmed? I really would love to hear in the comments. I might even include some of your answers in part 2 if you guys want that. And again, I want to hear from you guys so that I'm not just talking to myself. That's kind of sad. Anyway, until next time, friends, be good to yourself, be good to each other, be blessed, be balanced, be blissful, and be blooming, and plant something. Use your gifts in 2026, and I'll see you next time.
The luxury breathing, but I don't think I'm living. Yeah, my mama be tripping, saying you acting different, cause I feel so alone. People don't make a difference. They'll be here for a moment and be gone in an instant. Man, this shit got me livid, and I'm done with these women.